Well, it's a good game for us. Made a lot of plays on offense, and some young guys got a little bit better. And obviously, we were able to rally enough defensively late to make some plays. So, had a good day yesterday, and just back at it to another week. Day off today, and back at practice tomorrow.
Very good. Members of the media, if you have questions for Mike Gundy, please click raise hand, and we're going to try and get to everybody. Our first question comes from Cliff Brunt from the Associated Press. Go ahead, Cliff.
Coach, just wanted to ask you if you had any update on the status of your top two running backs, and then also if Desmond by chance has maybe earned more action based on how he performed on Saturday, regardless of how those guys are doing.
Well, both of those guys will try to get into practice on Tuesday. Monday is their big day where they get examined. We always try to find out more about them. But as of now, Dez is our starter.
Appreciate it.
Our next question comes from Dean Rule from the O'Colly. Go ahead, Dean.
Hey, Coach. Good morning. Thanks for taking the time.
Mm-hmm.
Spencer Sanders is coming off, one of the better games of this season. Now that you've had a couple days to look at it, what are your thoughts on that game he had on Saturday?
He played very well. His composure was good and graded really high in his reads and took care of the football. So we were pleased with his game Saturday.
You expecting the same thing from him come TCU?
I hope so. He should get a little better each week. So hopefully he'll play as consistent as he did in the last game.
Thank you.
Our next question comes from Barry Trammell from the Oklahoman. Go ahead, Barry. Barry, I think you may be on mute. Can you go ahead and unmute, please?
There we go. Okay. Hey, Mike, you've had some really good teams, but some of your best teams were the years we didn't have a title game in the conference. You've never made it to Arlington for the championship game. What would it do for the program to get to Arlington? You're still in the running to make it.
Well, our goal every year is to win the conference championship, and you got to get there to do that. So, long term, I'm not sure. It'd be hard for me. I hadn't thought about that, but that's our goal anyways, to try to find a way to get in that game and try to find a way to win it.
This is in some ways, because of the COVID and all the cancellations and the mess in the schedule, in some ways, is this a season of attrition? Just whoever can sort of stagger to the finish line and get their games played and keep as many guys healthy in every way as possible?
I think we felt that way to start the season, but our medical people and our plan from June has been as good as anybody in the country. And so we've been very fortunate. We haven't had issues with COVID. And we've had the majority of our guys have practiced and been consistent. So other than just uncertainty mentally with players and I guess everybody, COVID hasn't really been an issue with our football team.
Our next question comes from Robert Allen from Triple Play Sports Radio. Go ahead, Robert.
Yeah, Mike, you really haven't had a problem with COVID. This team has handled it well, but you are kind of beat up, and there are other teams around the country like you that are kind of beat up. Do you blame that at all on maybe the disjointed preseason and conditioning leading up to the season?
Well, I don't think there's any question that some of the nagging injuries and maybe even more some of the serious injuries for us, I can't speak for other teams, are related not necessarily to the virus, but are related to the lack of preparation to start the season because of the virus. So when we start in August, our players are in tip-top condition and up and running. And it wasn't this way this year because we didn't have any off-season training. So there's no question that affected us, and I'm guessing probably affected everybody else in the country.
Were you surprised Desmond held up as well physically? Because I know you said sometimes he looked maybe tired, but looking at him on the sidelines, he always looked ready to go from where I was standing. He looked pretty fresh even in the fourth quarter.
I'm surprised that he could carry the ball 36 times and at times 5 and 6 times in a row and play over 75 plays in the game. Yes, that's hard to do for anybody. And so he did impress me from that standpoint of his ability to stay in the game and compete.
Last thing, I know you and Gary Patterson get along pretty well, and that's been a pretty good coaching rivalry between the two of you guys, and your success has kind of mirrored each other some. Talk about that matchup coming up Saturday with you and Gary.
Well, Gary's one of the best football coaches in college football, and there's just no question about his durability. From a standpoint of years of service and the teams that he's had, and they don't always get what some people consider 4- and 5-star players. They find a way to win, and so he and I, when we have conference functions, we always buddy up, and I tease him and he teases me, but we get along. We have a really good relationship, and I enjoy competing against him. And, they're really good on defense again this year. They do a nice job. They run to the ball, and he has a plan. So it'll be a real challenge for us on Saturday.
Thanks, Coach.
Our next question is going to come from Frank Bonner from the Tulsa World. Go ahead, Frank.
Hey, Mike, one of the constants for you guys on offense has been Tylan Wallace. What has he been for you guys this season and being able to come back from the injury the way he has?
We were talking about him last night before we went home. In my opinion, he's made our football team much, much better from his competitive leadership standpoint. Our team has followed his willingness to perform at a high level. And personally for him, he's made himself a lot of money this year. For example, late in the game against Oklahoma, when we were down to the point where it's difficult for us to even think about coming back to win, we tried to take him out of the game, and he wouldn't go out of the game. He wanted to finish the game. So that's the kind of young man that you're dealing with. And he's been a joy to be around and a joy to coach, particularly this year coming back from his injury.
And then with Dez being able to run the way he has, how much of that, helped benefit Tylan Wallace, knowing that you guys had the running game going?
Yeah, I mean, we're not good enough offensively to be one-dimensional. We have to stay balanced, and we have to try to keep the other team off balance. And it's been that way here for a lot of years. We're 2 or 3 years, maybe we were good enough to where we could become one-dimensional, but we're not in that position right now. So we have to be able to rush the football effectively to keep the defense off balance, and that allows Tylan to make some plays.
Appreciate you, Mike.
Our next question comes from Scott Wright from the Oklahoman. Go ahead, Scott.
Sticking with Tylan for a minute, what does he do that's unique to him compared to some of the other great ones that you've had?
Well, he's special when it comes to taking the ball at the highest point. Yeah, he's a great leaper, but he also has a gift of going up and rebounding a football. That's unlike many players that we've ever had here in my 16 years as the head coach.
Also wanted to ask you about Jake Springfield. How has he played? It's an odd situation for a guy to go from walk on to getting a scholarship to starting left tackle all in the span of just a couple of months. How has he played for you?
His competitive nature, his willingness to give up his time, his effort, his body for our organization has been tremendous. He's been bummed up for the last few weeks with an ankle, and having to push through it is not easy. He's played okay, but he's managed. So where he was thrown into the fire, for lack of a better term, he's played really, really good. But if you're grading him on a major college level and his consistency at the left tackle position, he's managed. But that's not necessarily his fault at this time. There's only so much you can do in his situation. But he's a little bit healthier today than he was last week. So we appreciate what he's given us, and we see him getting a little bit better each week.
Thanks, Mike.
Our next question comes from Garen Emig from the Tulsa World. Go ahead, Garen.
Mike, from your being around any NFL personnel this year, do you have a sense that Chuba's going to be okay despite the lack of gaudy numbers that he put up a year ago? Is his NFL future still as secure as it was this time a year ago?
You know, I don't know what those guys look for. I mean, I think there's some players that are we call no-brainers. They're going to be a first or round pick or an early round pick. I don't have any idea how the NFL sees Chuba right now. I'm not on those phone calls. The NFL doesn't talk to me. You know, they talk to academics, they talk to Rob Glass, they talk to operations people. I don't have conversations with NFL scouts or coaches, so I'm not really in on that. It'd be unfair for me to say one way or the other of how they see him at this particular time.
You bring up the film that guys put up as being awfully important, no matter the prospect. Do you? Let me ask you this: do you get a sense the film that he put up when he was fully healthy and had an easier time with his O-line a year ago will help see him through?
Again, I mean, you would think so. You know, I just use that quote because when we have NFL people come in and visit with our team, I'm in the meeting, you know, I'm in the room. There's, you know, 130 of us in there. And the first thing they say is there's not anything any coach or any person can do to convince us other than putting the video on and watching you have success. That's what we draft you on. So I would think that would carry some weight. But I mean, I'm not for sure. You know, it's just hard for me to tell. I've never been in any of those meetings.
Okay, thanks.
Our next question comes from Jacob Unruh from the Oklahoman. Go ahead, Jacob.
Hey, Mike, kind of back to Thailand a little bit. What about Trayson? What kind of impact has Trayson had, considering staying around coaching after his injury and everything?
Well, those guys are inseparable, and Trayson wants to get into coaching, and he's off to a good start. Gives him a chance to still be a part of the team, be a part of his brother, which is important. And he's a guy that we trust on the sidelines and communication, and has a really good, clear communication with his brother during games. So it's been awesome that we could help him out with his injuries and then be a part of his career.
On a different note, obviously, extra year of eligibility. Have you started to have discussions with seniors, you know, about whether they want to come back or not with extra year?
No, I guess we'll have to have those discussions after our final game. And then there's some uncertainty based on how the NCAA is going to handle that situation. There's a lot up in the air right now based on total numbers, scholarships availability, and roster numbers. And until the NCAA gives us some guidance, I know at Oklahoma State our hands are tied somewhat.
Okay. Thanks, Mike.
Our next question comes from Jenny Carlson from the Oklahoman. Go ahead, Jenny.
Hey, Mike. I can't remember if you got asked after the game on Saturday or if Jim did, but Rodarius obviously was limited after about the first quarter. What do you know at this point about his status and his health?
I think he'll be back out Tuesday. He had a mild foot sprain, and it's kind of nagging him a little bit. I believe it was the middle of the first quarter when he went out. Hopefully he'll be okay this week. It's a big difference when he's in the game and not in the game for our defense.
I know Jim referenced the fact that the guys that you put in there for him were also kind of dealing with banged up situations, not 100% healthy, but sort of what you just referenced. I mean, how dramatically, I'm sure everybody was reminded to a degree how dramatically Rodarius affects things, but did that even, like, are you even sort of in a wow factor when it comes to just how locked down he has been this year for you guys?
Well, you know, I'd mentioned Tylan Wallace has made himself a lot of money this year. So has Rodarius. Rodarius is probably the hottest guy on our team right now when it comes to interest from the NFL. He's been fabulous in coverage, and he's competed and played hard. His attitude's been great. And what he's putting on tape is exactly what those guys at that level want to see, in my opinion. So, you know, you take a guy that's potentially moved himself up maybe 3 or 4 rounds in the draft by his play on tape this year. And obviously at Oklahoma State, we don't get a lot of guys that are going to go, you know, maybe high in the draft. So when he's not in, it does make a difference. But hopefully he'll be okay in the next couple of days and get out there and get some reps and play at TCU.
I know ever since his brother declared a couple years ago, I think at that point he had said something that he thought about it. And so he's thought for a couple years about potentially going. And I know you're an advocate of guys coming back, but when you think about that improvement, I have to think he's a guy you'll likely refer to when you talk to guys about that in the future.
Well, I'm an advocate of players coming back that aren't going to be high round picks.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? And again, I don't know, but I'm just going to guess the product on the tape. He might have been after last year, a late round pick, maybe 6th round pick or something.
Yeah.
And so what advantage do you get not coming back and going to school and trying to raise your stock and somewhat protect yourself financially before you go in to make a roster? And so for him, I would have to ask those guys at some point after the draft, but he's probably jumped himself 3 or 4 rounds. If we have 1st round picks or even guys that are early 2nd round picks who can financially make themselves and their families stable for a long period of time just with the stroke of the pen, I would always recommend that those guys come out. Now, we've had guys come back. You know, Whedon came back, Blackman came back, Okun came back, Pettigrew came back. You know, we've had a number of guys that have come back based on their decision. In most cases, it's worked out well for them. So Rodarius has put himself in a really good position. I mentioned earlier what he's done for our team, but for himself individually, if he finishes this season strong, which there's no reason that he shouldn't if he's healthy, he's made himself a bunch of money just by his play that he's putting on video.
Thanks, Mike.
Coach, too, just to kind of dovetail off of that, what's Rob Glass's impact on that particular side of it?
In which way?
And how, you know, when you have a guy who's a returning guy who's already played a couple of years, you come back from being a late round guy to being a mid round to early round guy, and just kind of some of the development and everything that goes in physically and mentally through Glass and his program.
He's going to adjust their lifting, you know, to make sure that their body's in really good condition, because once you've been competing at this level for 2, 3, 4 years, your body becomes an issue. I don't care what position you play. He does a good job with that. He communicates well with them. He's very honest and upfront about, in his opinion, where they're at when it comes to the draft. Sometimes he gives players information they don't want to hear. But the best thing we can do is tell them the truth to try to improve their status and where they're at. And it's worked for him. It's worked for Rodarius, and he's gone about his work in a quiet way, and he stayed humble, and it's paid off for him. And Rob has an effect on those guys. He's done this a long time. The NFL trusts his comments and the things that he'll say to them based on the players on our team.
We'll go back to Jenny Carlson. Go ahead, Jenny.
Hey, sorry, Mike. I didn't expect to get on the injury question train, but talking about premier guys, Tevin comes to mind. I know he was recognized for the senior ceremony, but wasn't there even on the field. Does that speak to the severity of the issue he's dealing with?
Are you talking about injury-wise?
Yeah.
No. Tevin, I think Tevin is deciding to go prepare for the NFL.
Okay.
I hate to speak for him, but that's what I think is going on. So I'm going to let him, for lack of a better term, make that decision. And then if he decides to do that publicly, I'll let him do that. But that's the direction I see him going. I'm not sure what his status would be medically, because when you have a tweaked back, sometimes, well, a lot of times it won't show up on an MRI or a CAT scan, but then you still have some pain. So I'm going to let him make that decision and how he communicates that to us and to you guys at some point.
Hey, speaking of the offensive line, I know obviously you were without him coming out of Bedlam, but it seems like when Charlie has a good week of practice to get his guys ready, if guys don't get hurt during the course of a game, they play pretty darn well. Have you sort of seen evidence that, I mean, I know injuries obviously can scuttle everything, but Have you seen evidence of that? Even with the revolving door of guys, maybe from one week to the next, if they've got that week, is that a pretty good indicator that they're gonna be pretty good?
What it does, Jenny, is it lessens their missed assignments. So, the best illustration would be like you getting a study guide to take a test in college. And if you have a chance to review that study guide and put your time in, you have an opportunity to score good on the test. So when we have 5 guys during the week that are practicing at their particular position, and they're using that study guide, and what's happened to us is if we've had a guy go down, in most cases we've had to move at least 2 people. And when you do that, the guide that you use during the week of the study guide, it gets thrown out the window. And so that's a huge issue with offensive line play. And what you're saying is the same thing that I've been saying for the last 8 weeks that we've gone through this is I have faith in Charlie, and I have faith in Coach Dunn and our staff and what we're trying to get accomplished. And we at least kept the same 5 guys in the same positions in this last game. And it allowed us to have less missed assignments. And you guys that watched the game have as many guys get turned loose in the backfield. So in most cases, if your running back can read and hit a crease and he'll run hard, gives you a chance to have a little success.
Thanks.
All right, our final 2 questions. We're going to kind of have to fly through them a little bit here, but our final 2 questions are going to come from Garen Emig and Barry Trammell. We'll start with Garen. Go ahead, Garen.
Okay, thanks, Gavin. Mike, if Tevin's in a situation where he might be better served to get himself fit for the NFL draft, could you say the same for Chuba at this point? Might he want to go get his ankle right and get trained up if there's some uncertainty that you referenced about his future?
I think it's a personal decision for all of them. And things have changed so much over the last 3 or 4 or 5 years. We had this discussion in the media day years ago when you started seeing players that chose to not play in the bowl game.
Right.
And if you guys remember, one of my concerns with that was, as I said, I'm afraid it'll start and then this could just grow and grow and grow and grow, where if teams weren't in the playoffs or maybe a New Year's Bowl, I'm not sure. I don't know how to say one way or the other. If you have multiple players from multiple teams that are leaving to prepare for the NFL, then I worried about the long-term effects of bowl games. Teams that are, or not teams, but organizations that are sponsoring and putting lots and lots of money into bowl games, how they'll feel about teams that are playing that might be down 2, 3, 4, 5 players, which we all know can dramatically change a football team. So the question you asked me is, I think it's a personal decision for each player based on, one, just how he feels, and then in most cases, they're going to get information from some sort of representative financially or contractually for them to move forward. So it would be unfair for me to say one way or the other for any player. I just know that it's kind of the moving trend right now for players to, to stop playing and just start working on what might be next in their career.
Okay. Thanks.
All right, and our final question will come from Barry Trammell. Go ahead, Barry.
Yeah, Mike, back on Des Jackson, the 36 carries. Is it people don't do that much anymore? Is that because the game's gotten to where you don't run the ball that much? Is it because it's just too physically taxing? Or is it something guys could actually do if given the opportunity? He held up very well. Did it do your heart good to see? That's something out of the 80s there. Is that something we could see return at some point?
Well, I think the latter, what you said, is true. These guys can do it. They're just not conditioned to do it. So what happens is we hope, and I speak for Oklahoma State, I don't know about other teams, but we hope that we have at least 2 running backs that we, for lack of a better term, trust to put in the game. And then if you have a third, you're really in a good situation. So they will share reps during the week. And then if we spread the reps out, I think as coaches now, we're in the last, 6, 8, 10 years, we say, well, we need to keep these guys fresh. In the old days, we didn't worry about keeping them fresh. If we had a good player and he was a running back, he carried the ball 30 times a game. So earlier in this interview, I said I was a little surprised that he was able to perform like that because we haven't given him that workload in practice. And there were a number of times that, more than a number of times that he ran with really, really good effort. So I think young men can do that. I just don't think as coaches we put them in a position to do that.
All right, that'll do it for questions. Coach, before we wrap it up, is there anything that you wanted to share or maybe anything that we missed?
I'm good. I'm all good, ready for another week, and it's a little bit unusual. All the students are gone now for the virus, I guess. So a little quiet around here, but ready to go back to work and get ready for TCU.